All right, so I wanted to go over the system, sort of see from a file perspective what exactly is going on here. And I noticed a couple of separate things that we have here. One of the major factors and one of the big things that slows down a system is nodes and vectors. So for instance, you look at this file and we can see here that we have quite a number of nodes here on this letter. And if we actually go to each letter, we see a significant number of these. And while on larger scale or larger shaped images, that's fine, but you'll see here each one of these lines, only 2 vectors apiece. This here, this is a staggering amount of vectors. These are just the number of pieces that you don't actually need in here. Is a little crazy in terms of, this arc here. A traditional arc would actually only have 4 points in it. This one would have, the one here, the one as a reference here, one here, one down here, and then one finally over here to set up the entirety of the arc. Now, that being said, when the plasma cutter goes to cut anything, it will go from vector to vector. That is to say, it'll go from this point to this point, and it does a micro pause between each point. Why? Because it has to be able to compensate for, let's say, at this point here, it actually has to make a complete over 90-degree turn right here, meaning that it has to decelerate and accelerate between each point. So there's a deceleration and acceleration, deceleration, acceleration at each one of these points, meaning that this cut here, the plasma is actually going to be sitting for longer in each one of these points as you work through it. So what has to be done, and you'll have to do this in, now I'm guessing this file was made in SheetCam. This particular logo was made in SheetCam. And what we want to do is remove as many of these nodes as is possible. Again, because at that size, at that tiny size that we're looking at here, at this, minimal size, on a traditional cut would be absolutely be fine as long as you didn't have this many nodes or vectors, meaning that the plasma isn't going to slow down, so that the slag that you do develop will be at the natural point. So at this corner here, you would naturally have a little tiny dab of dross that develops because at that corner it had to slow down to make that turn. Same thing down here, 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 and each one of these corners where it has to slow down and compensate for that is where you'll experience that turn. So go ahead and take a look at those pieces here, and I would suggest actually cleaning up the file first, because at this scale, at this size, the plasma, and I'm sure you've seen it while it's cutting, is actually jittering, going point to point to point to point in order to make these letters cut out the way that we want them to. And at 350 inches a minute, it's even more pronounced because of the amount of acceleration and deceleration between every motion. So that's what I see going on with the letters, and I would assume that these outside edges actually cut pretty cleanly. It's just this inside here is absolutely cluttered with far too many bits of nodes. I can go ahead and pull together a video to show you how to clean that up after the fact, but I just want you to see what's going on there first before we take it anywhere else. Alright, so let's talk about the way SheetCam sees this. So we just hopped off of looking at QCAD, seeing what we had in the number of vectors, and we'll see here there are a lot of vectors going on, and we have white on the outside and red on the inside. So that's definitely something to be concerned about here. White on the outside, red on the inside. White means that it's open vectors. That is to say, it's a line, and there's a difference between a line and a shape. For instance, this D is a shape, and this a shape doesn't have ends. It just, it's a continuous vector, as opposed to a line which has a beginning and an end. And if I were to look here, looks like these 2 points aren't connected here, and I'm sure if we actually go through, multiple points aren't connected together. Now, that in and of itself is going to present you with a problem. Let's go ahead and put an operation on here. Operation plasma cut. Now you're going to see a couple other tools pop up on my screen because this also has router tooling on it. I'm using a 16 gauge simulator tool at 230. I'm going to go ahead and rate it to 350 inches a minute and hit OK. Now the problem with doing this outside offset on this layer is if we actually cut in close, the plasma cutter is going to cut around the outside of this shape. Now the problem with cutting on the outside of the shape is realistically, because you want it to cut out of this material, you're going to want to cut from the inside of this shape, meaning that you're going to get overblown letters with excess amounts of slag because of the overblown nature of it. We're going to need to do some fixing to this file to make it work because, again, we have quite a few problems with this cut. Yeah. All right, so the problems right now, too many vectors. And then if you look at this, the outside shapes and even this gear here are not completely connected. So what I did is I just reopened all of this in Inkscape, and I went ahead and started to combine things. So let's go ahead and walk through what I did here. All right, so as you notice here, I can click on individual portions, and they're all fun and not connected. As opposed to D or the E, all of those segments are connected. These are not connected. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to go to my pointer tool, select everything except for these two. These two lines, I don't want anything to do with those two lines because they're lines and we want to keep them that way. And then I go to my vector editor tool, so I see all of my vectors. I go to edit and I go to select all. So I'm selecting everything, and there's a button here that allows me to turn it into just connect all the points that need to be connected. So let's take a look here. Are we still disconnected? Nope, we got those shapes, and we're having some, oh, there we go. I'm going to select all of those and connect those. And what I've done is this is just a connect button, join selected nodes. So now when I select it, there's that, they're all connected. Now we still have a lot of vectors here, so I'm going to hit Control L on all of these individual letters. You notice as I'm hitting Control L, it's actually removing so many vectors. It is actually cleaning those things up. So we're actually going to cut this one out now just to show the difference between the two. We want to make sure that we're seeing all of the differences on this file. And I'm going to do this on this one without hopefully killing it. Nope, looks good. Everything else looks good. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and file, save this, and then bring it over to SheetCam. All right, so let's go through a couple of the differences here. Now, this is with the adjusted file. Now, I'll notice here that I must not have actually fixed a couple of these points here. It looks like I have some white here, meaning that I have, let's take a look, an extra point in here I have to adjust, and another point here I have to delete. It looks like we have just a couple extra lines, so I'm going to have to go through and delete that. Let's go into oh, well, that would be why. There are actually two of them here. Oh, that's not cool. Let's try that. And it looks like I have an extra, well, would you look at that? Completely extra part there. Right, now I'm going to go ahead and save this, and let's go ahead and bring that back up. Okay, so I went back through and just deleted those extra lines, and I imported it back up into here, and we see that, okay, now we have yellow on the inside, which means it's a shape inside of a shape, and red on the outside. So when I go, select my layer, I hit OK. Now, what we see here is that it's cutting on the inside of all of our letters in order to get ourselves some clarity here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this over to our shop to go ahead and get cut and see how that goes for them there.